You're listening to Money FM 89.3, and time now for Mind Your Business with me, Lynlee, and Ryan. Ryan, did you know that about three-quarters of the world's food crops rely on pollination by bees and other pollinators like butterflies and bats?
That's right, Lynn. But research shows that these creatures are increasingly under threat due to human activities and climate change. So, what does that all mean for food security? That's definitely going to be an issue in no time if we do nothing about it. So, we have to figure out how do we get around all these challenges. And beyond that, have you thought about what happens in indoor urban farms where there are no bees? Because that's probably going to be the
Hmm.
future, indoor farming.
Exactly. Well, those are the very issues our guest for today is set on solving. Local startup Polybee, which devised a new way of using drones to pollinate crops, has seen promising results in its ongoing trials in indoor farms overseas. And they're looking to partner with more of such farms. For more, we're joined by Siddharth Jadhav, founder and CEO of Polybee. Good morning.
Hi, Lynlee. Hi, Ryan. Great to be here, and good morning to all listeners.
All right, for our listeners who might not already know how your technology works, could you briefly describe how your innovation mimics what bees do and how close is the effect compared to that?
Sure. So, essentially what we've built is an autonomous solution for precision pollination that uses micro drones and AI. To sort of, kind of describe the technology a bit more, I think the first thing to understand is what is the landscape of pollination as a process in agriculture, right? So if you
Mhm.
look at the total farm gate value of everything that we grow in the world, it's more than $2.5 trillion every year, right? Out of that, there's roughly 800 to 900 billion worth of crops that are fruits and vegetables. Now, what's interesting is that this is the fastest growing sector in agriculture in terms of farm gate value, right? Out of that fraction of 800 to 900 billion dollars, roughly 600 to 700 billion dollars worth of produce directly and entirely depends on pollination. So if we do not have natural pollinators doing the work for us, that much of farm gate value of produce is at threat. So that's the kind of impact to assess here, and it's what we got started with, in terms of assessing the market size. So out of that sort of, accumulative value of 600 to 700 billion dollars of produce, um, pollination can be divided into two types. So there are crops which we call are self-pollinating crops, and there are crops what we call cross-pollinating crops. And the distinction really lies between how the male and female parts of the flower are distributed, right? So, by definition, pollination is the process where you transfer the pollen grains from the male part to the female part, and how these parts are distributed is what leads to self or cross-pollination. Now, to give you examples here, more or less crops are evenly distributed across these two types. So, tomatoes, strawberries, pepper, eggplant are all self-pollinating crops, and crops like apples, almonds, peaches, cherries are all cross-pollinating crops, including avocados. So, what we have developed is a technology that automates pollination for self-pollinating crops. And the reason why we did this is because the market size in itself is huge, and it's a slightly easier problem to get started with, right? So now let's look at how bees do this first, and then see how our technology compares to it, right? So
Mhm.
um, as I said, self-pollinating crops involve male and female parts being on the same flower. So what bees do is they kind of go to these flowers for pollen, which is their food.
Mhm.
And in that process, they accidentally transfer the pollen grains from the male part of the flower to the female part of the flower. And I'll give you an example of tomatoes here, right, which are largely pollinated by bumblebees. So what they do is they find these flowers, latch onto it, and vibrate their muscles at certain frequencies, which is what gets pollination done. So essentially, the problem statement is all about transferring sufficient energy to these flowers such that you shake the pollen out of the male parts, right? That's what we need to get done. That's what bees do for us. And we achieve the same objective by using drones. And what we have
Mhm.
developed is a contactless pollination method, which exploits the airflow in the downwash of drones to vibrate these flowers at just the right frequencies. And the important thing to note here is that this is not just any kind of airflow, right? So we often get asked, hey, why do you want to use drones for this? Why don't you just use a fan for this kind of airflow and subject it to the flowers. But there's very specific aerodynamic and mechanical properties that we have studied here, empirically at the National University of Singapore, and then we did a bunch of trials together with the Singapore Food Agency to determine what's the optimal way to do this. Right. So that's basically how our pollination method works with drones, where you have autonomous drones flying around, detecting where the flowers are, and vibrating them with the downwash at just the right frequencies for successful pollination.
Yeah, that's quite fascinating. You're literally shaking things up in this space. And let's talk about some of the trials that are underway right now. In Australia and New Zealand, I understand you've got something going on since 2019. Why are you targeting that region, and what's the sort of progress and results you've seen so far?
Sure. So, the go-to market strategy for us is what we call controlled environment agriculture as the first market to target. And that's kind of an umbrella term, right? That's something to appreciate here, because, we might often sort of look at CEA as primarily indoor farming, but that's just one type of farming in that spectrum, right? The spectrum ranges from fully indoor vertical farms on the one hand, where you have control on inputs, climate, and lighting, to high-tech glass houses, which is a proven method which is economically viable across temperate climates. And then you have passive greenhouses or polytunnels, where you have more or less a shelter to protect the crops from extreme weather. And you have some degree of control on the inputs. And essentially, that's the kind of spectrum that we look at. So when we first started off in 2019, we looked at indoor farming, to build our technology for. And essentially, what we built there was nano drones the size of your palm, which could pollinate strawberry plants in an indoor vertical farm. And essentially, that was the kind of proof of concept that we worked on initially, which worked, in various conditions. But generally speaking, if you look at indoor farming as a sector, there is much growth to be seen yet, right? And that's for a variety of reasons. For us, from a startup's perspective, we had to go find those customers with who we can have big contracts and recurring ones at the same time. And hence we kind of steered further down that spectrum of controlled environment agriculture, from fully indoor vertical farms to high-tech glass houses. And the countries where you find a lot of these glass houses are Netherlands, Australia, even in Asia, you do find a lot of them, Japan, and so on. So we picked Australia because I think it was just the perfect kind of blend of the right conditions for us to get started. Well, number one is that you do not have bumblebees in Australia. It's the only pollinator you can use in greenhouses, and you cannot even import these bees either, because it's a threat to the local biodiversity. It could be invasive. So a lot of companies have been lobbying for their imports, but I don't believe that will ever change. So that's one. Second is that the glasshouse sector is growing really fast there, and essentially what that means is the only way for these growers to pollinate the crops is by hand, and that makes it a hair on fire problem for them, which is where the opportunity is for us.
So we understand that you've not test-bedded the technology with Singapore farms as yet. Is it because it's difficult to get traditional growers or farmers on board this new innovation, or are you planning to do so in due time?
Right. So, as it stands, we are of course all aware of Singapore's mandate for food security. Starting off with 30 by 30, sort of as kind of fleshed out by SFA. But as it stands, we don't have big growers, who have tens or hundreds of hectares of land where they're growing fruit crops that need pollination. So again, from a startup's perspective, what we want to get on the trajectory of is finding those big customers with who we can sign 6-7 figure contracts in the near term, and deploy those high margin services, and then kind of go further down that curve of adoption in terms of the type of customer that we work with. And that is what kind of steered us to markets like Australia and Netherlands. And just to Ryan's question on what the efficacy has been like, so what I can share is that we've been deploying our technology since the last year at a sizable scale with some of the biggest glasshouse growers in Australia. And what we've observed is that the performance is at least as good or even better on many occasions across different seasons of the year for tomatoes in glasshouses. And I cannot share more specific numbers yet, since
Mhm.
a lot of these deployments are ongoing. But what I can share is that our customers are asking us to scale up, as every quarter passes. So that's a real kind of I'd say a marker of the success of the technology, its viability, and also its robustness.
Yeah, talking about plans, right? I understand you initially started using your own drones, but now it's possible for your partners to use off-the-shelf drones. So, in that sense, is that the way to scale up? You think being able to let people use that technology, is that something you sell, the technology know-how? And also, what's the cost factor here for them to scale up in that sense? Is that a limiting factor?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, the shift from, using our own assembled drones to off-the-shelf drones was, game changing for us, because what we observed was that, as a startup, it really allows us to focus on our core strengths, which is automation software, right? And what that allows us to do is leverage existing, highly robust, affordable, reliable drones that are available in the market. And it's a win-win for everyone, and I'll tell you why. Number one is, of course, for us as a service provider, it really allows us to focus, and hardware is kind of almost abstracted out for us. It's great for customers because they have that confidence and trust in using consumer grade hardware, right? They're not too worried about these drones not working or flying out of the skies or crashing into something, right? And then lastly, it really allows us to craft a business model that works for everyone, because customers that we're working with today are capex heavy businesses. So they prefer owning assets, which means they can purchase these drones directly from the market, amortize them across a few years. And then what we charge them for is a subscription fee for our automation software that runs on the top of these drones. So all in all, how it looks on their balance sheet is an asset that is amortized across a few years, a service fee, which together is significantly cheaper than what they're spending on labor expenses for manual pollination. So that's how we kind of crafted this win-win situation across not just getting our technology to be more scalable, but also crafting out a business model that works for everyone.
Siddharth, as the CEO of Polybee, I'm pretty sure you're looking to grow your business. Which other regions are you targeting or hoping you can expand your business to?
Right. So our go-to-market continues to be greenhouse agriculture, which is pretty I'd say mature in regions like Australia to a certain degree. In Asia, there's Japan, there's China, of course. We're not targeting that market yet, but in the West we have, of course, Netherlands, where we have a pretty strong presence already. In the future, we'll look at markets in Americas. So Mexico and Canada are also regions which are pretty, I'd say, mature in terms of controlled environment agriculture. And once we capture this opportunity in our go-to market, is when we will also start looking at open field farms and crops. And I guess in that sense, we will continue to target those regions which are pretty, I'd say, kind of big in production in volumes of different types of crops as well. So we'll continue to focus deeper on the crops that we're working on today, which is pollinated crops like tomatoes and berries. Go across these regions and then look at other high value crops in fresh produce, and then kind of tailor our technology for them.
Right, here's wishing you all the best and hoping that your business takes off to even greater heights. I've been sharing with Siddharth Jadhav. He is the founder and CEO of Polybee, about how his technology and drones is helping shake up industry and possibly replicate the work that the bees do in pollinating some of these important crops.
Thank you very much, Siddharth.
Thank you, Lynlee and Ryan. Great to be here.
Money FM 89.